Shalom Aleichem. Thank you for joining. Tonight, we're going to take a deeper look into our lives, into our Judaism, into the mitzvahs that we do, and the mitzvahs that we're not good at doing yet. And hopefully, we're going to cultivate a whole new paradigm of real living Yiddishkeit. Something which sounds obvious once you've learned it, but it's not obvious at all if you haven't. Okay, I've made big promises. Let me start from the beginning. Every Torah portion has a name, and the name of the Torah portion expresses the theme of that Torah portion. Each Torah portion is usually named after the first few words of that Torah portion, but not always. And the actual reason for the name of the Torah portion is not because we have to choose some word in the Torah portion and let's choose the first word, but there's actually a connection between the energy of the Torah portion and the name of that Torah portion. Look, for example, at Parshas Noach. Parshas Noach begins with the words Eile Toldos Noach. So if the idea of naming a Torah portion was connected with the first words of the Torah portion, then it would make sense to call that Parsha Toldot. But instead, that Torah portion is called Noach. We skip the second word, we choose the third word, because it's only that word that expresses what that Torah portion is about. And only later on, in Parshas Toldos, we choose the earlier word in the Torah, we choose the word Toldos to name the Torah portion Toldos. We don't call that Torah portion Yitzchak, we call that Torah portion Toldos. So we see that the Torah portions are directly connected to something deeper than just the first word or the second word or the third word of the Torah portion. It has to do instead with the energy of that weekend. The Alter Rebbe is famous for saying the following words: you have to live with the times. When he said those words, the Chassidim had no idea what he was talking about. They knew he couldn't possibly be referring to the Parisian fashion or the literature of London, but they didn't know what he meant until the Alter Rebbe's son explained that the Alter Rebbe meant you have to live with the Torah portion of the week. So the Torah portion this week, there are actually two Torah portions, a double portion, and the names seem incongruous to the theme and the content of the Torah portion. The first Torah portion this week begins with a woman who gives birth and the laws of the Torah about birth and circumcision. Circumcision is done on the 8th day. And then the Torah goes on, and the main bulk of the Torah portion is about disease. Disease, and a specific kind of disease called tsaras, which someone would get if they spoke poorly of others. When you spoke negatively about other people, so the Torah says that you would receive, God forbid, God would send a plague to cause the person who had said these words to cease and desist this behavior and to learn a different way of living and to stop being so arrogant, so full of enmity and hatred, and instead to adopt a more positive outlook on life. So the Torah says that God would send this plague to this person, and the bulk of the Torah portion discusses what this plague looked like, how could you determine if someone indeed had this plague, and throughout this entire Torah portion, we learn more and more about the details of the plague. What's surprising is that the name of the Torah portion, which is discussing plagues, is to conceive, to give birth, renewal, life. Why would a Torah portion, which is all about disease, be called birth and renewal? A similar question could be asked about the second Torah portion this week. The second Torah portion this week is called Mitzora, which means the man with the disease. That's the name of this week's Torah portion, the man with the disease. And the subject matter, the bulk of the Torah portion, is not at all about the disease. The bulk of the Torah portion is how the man recovers from the disease, comes home, and is healthy, and goes back to his family. During the time of the illness, the person had to go away from the camp, he had to be separate from everybody, he had to be in quarantine. And after the illness is over, he is invited back to the Jewish people, invited back to his home. So it's a very positive theme, recovery, and yet the Torah chooses to title this Torah portion with the name, the man with the disease. Imagine walking into Barnes and Nobles and looking for a book and it says, the man with the disease. You probably wouldn't pick up that book, but let's say the jacket was so attractive, you picked up the book and you started looking through the book and it's so invigorating and inspiring and wow. And you're just wondering, why in the world are they calling this book the man with the disease? It's such a positive, powerful message, and yet such a negative, such an ugly title for such a beautiful story. So you have Torah portion number 1, which is about disease, and it's called by a title which expresses cure and expresses health, and expresses renewal and life. We have a second Torah portion, which is all about coming back home, and it's called the man with the disease. Why would the Torah do that? Why give us such a negative title for such a positive chapter in a person's life? And why give such a positive title to such a negative chapter in someone's life? The answer is that although it seems that the Torah has many forms of punishment, the Torah talks about all kinds of seemingly punitive measures that God takes for various negative behaviors. The truth is that there's no such thing as punishment in the Torah. The Torah is called a Torah of kindness, and God is called Avinu. He's called our Father. So even when we read in the Torah about a punishment, the truth is that it's not really a punishment. Sometimes when you listen to the Rebbe talk, you could hear one word, and that word gives you a whole new insight into a subject matter. It brings a lot of depth, just one nuance. The Rebbe was once talking about a teaching of the second Rebbe of Chabad, the Mittler Rebbe. The Mittler Rebbe was once so ill, he got very sick after listening to a Torah portion where the Torah recounts all the various calamities that happen to someone who is not careful to observe God's will. And when he got so sick, that there's a question whether he would be able to fast on Yom Kippur, because he was so sick just hearing the details of the calamities that God was sending. And someone asked him, hey, haven't you heard this Torah portion before? What happened this year? So he said, when my father reads the Torah portion, I don't hear any curses. That's the way the story is conventionally recounted. When the Alter Rebbe will read the Torah, he would be privy to the inner dimension, the inner energy of this Torah portion. And it would no longer be something about curses and about punitive measures. Instead, he would feel the inner meaning of the Torah portion. How this is something really good, something really positive, and how all of the Torah's seemingly curses are really higher blessings that are beyond our understanding, beyond human understanding. But the Rebbe said the story, and he changed the word. He said, when a father reads the Torah, you don't hear curses. In other words, it's not because of the Alter Rebbe's holiness, because he's so holy and he's such a lofty level, he's able to reveal the inner secrets of the Torah. This is a very simple fact of life. When a father reads the Torah, there are no curses. When you recognize, in other words, we can glean from the Rebbe's nuance is that just like every father, a father doesn't want to hurt his child. A father may rebuke his child, a father may give punitive measures to his child, but it's never for the purpose of hurt. It's never for the purpose of shame. It's always because he's a father and he loves his child. Therefore, another child, he won't be so interested in that child's behavior. He won't be interested in administering any punishment to that child. He won't have to. It's not even a temptation for him because he doesn't have that same kind of care for someone else's child. For his own child, it's a different kind of feeling. When it's his child, he feels a real attachment. Therefore, he wants his child to better his ways, and therefore he really hones in on his own child's behavior. In a similar way, although one of the principles of our faith, the 11th principle, is that there's reward and punishment, there's consequences for our deeds. But we have to understand that the consequences that Torah speaks of are all kindness. It's all for our benefit. I'll never forget, in one of my visits to Metropolitan Detention Center in downtown, when I was serving as a chaplain for the Jewish inmates in that prison, a man wanted to come to services. I used to go there on Friday, do services before Shabbat, and an Israeli man had just arrived in the prison, and he requested to come to services. He was a very religious man, and he wanted to be there. And usually people don't find out about services until later, and they're there for a couple of weeks before I can even see them. But this man he came to come to the services. And he says, I'm finally free. I remember, never forget this. I only saw him one time. I am finally free. And he was crying. I'm finally free. What he meant was that outside, as he said, outside, when I was there, I was in prison. I was in prison. All kinds of things going on in my heart and soul, and I wasn't free. There's a Jew named Martin Greenfield. Martin Greenfield, he is an expert designer. Designed many of the suits of American presidents, and he was in Buchenwald during World War II. And at one point in Buchenwald, the Nazis took many Jewish inmates outside of Buchenwald to a nearby city. And the Nazis told the Jewish inmates that they had to rebuild the mayor's house. The mayor's house had been struck by American forces bombing the house. So their job was to go and to do some construction there to rebuild the mayor's home. So Martin Greenfield said, when he was at this home, he noticed the house was destroyed and things were broken, and he noticed that there was a basement. And he went down the steps of the basement, hoping, starving. He's hoping he would find a carrot. He's hoping he would find a piece of lettuce. He's hoping he would find something to satisfy his incredible hunger. And he goes into the basement, and in the basement, there were 2 rabbits. And there was a little cage. And the rabbits had left a little piece of carrot and a piece of lettuce. And he stuck his hand into the cage to take the carrot. And that moment, the wife of the mayor comes down the steps of the basement and she screams, "You vile, filthy Jew. How dare you take what is so precious to me?" She calls the Nazis. The Nazis come over. They tell Martin to go and lie down. And he lie down in front of the other Jewish inmates. He lies down. They start beating him with murderous blows. And he was so beaten so badly, he could barely move. And he survived the war, but he decided that he wants to take vengeance against this woman. He wants to kill this woman who had shamed him so deeply. And he actually he survived the war. He got a gun with 2 other Jewish men, and they knew where the house was. And they went to the house, and they knocked on the door, and he pulled out the gun. And he said to her, "I'm the guy. You remember the guy? I'm the guy. I'm the one who you shamed for eating your rabbit's carrot." He's about to kill her. And she starts to plead for her life. She starts to beg him, "Please don't kill me. Please, please. I'm a mother. I'm a wife. Please." And all of a sudden he had a flashback at that moment to his cheder, to when he was a child studying in school, and he's listening to his Rebbe, to his teacher, and his teacher telling the students how precious it is, a human being, how precious man's life is, and he just threw the gun down and he walked away. And he said, Mario Greenfield said that that moment he was born again as a person. He had lost his, I mean, you could argue whether or not he should have killed her or not. That's not the discussion. He personally, as he was a person, he had lost that. He had lost his humane nature and become full of vengeance. And all he cared about was vengeance. And his throwing down the gun, he said it was the beginning of him becoming alive again. That's how he became alive. In a similar way, the guy who gets this disease, God sends this disease to, is suffering from a spiritual malady. He's suffering from a spiritual malady that's causing him to speak ill of others. Why is he speaking ill of others? Because he is full of rage, frustration, enmity. And the Torah says to him, God says to him, you got to let go of that stuff. And God, the Maimonides says that there's an order how this plague would be sent to a person. First, the plague would affect the walls of the house. The walls of the house, the color would change in the walls of the house. And then it would affect the person's clothing. If the person not cease and desist from speaking these negative words, then the plague would continue and it would affect the person's own skin, and he himself will get this disease. So every time the Torah talks about a punishment, the Torah is talking about rehabilitation. The Torah is talking about a spiritual recovery. It's every time a person experiences a challenge from God, the truth is that it's always coming to us for our benefit. Shalom, we always pray, we ask God to give us toiv hanirav nigla, open and clear good. We don't want to be tested, and God is a genius. He doesn't have to send us things that are challenging to us. He could figure out ways to better our behavior without any negative feelings, without any negative challenges and pain and sickness and illness. And yet, when we believe with perfect faith that God is our loving Father, and therefore when something happens to me, it's meant for me, and it's something that I need to grow from. The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe said, there's a group of American students that visited the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe during World War II. Rebbe, you remember Rabbi Greenberg from Morristown, right? The father of Rabbi Greenberg and Teferes. He was one of those students. And he visited the previous Rebbe during World War II, and he came to visit the Rebbe. And then when they got to the Rebbe, they had to figure out a way to come back home. And the previous Rebbe told them, every bomb has an address. No bomb will take you. That's what he told them. So these yeshiva students went, and yes, they saw bombs all around them, but no bomb hit them. And they knew from the Rebbe that no bomb would, because the Rebbe said every bomb has an address. Rebbe Tzimnucha Rachel, the Mittel Rebbe's daughter, was going to move to Hebron. Before she moved to Hebron, she asked for her father's blessing because she was very frightened. She heard there's a lot of rainstorms in Hebron. And her father told her, it will never rain on you. Don't ask me to explain the story. She went to Hebron, and it never rained on her. Did she walk between the raindrops? I don't know. I just know if the Mittel Rebbe told her it will never rain on you, it never rained on her. So if it rains on me, it's meant for me. Those drops of rain are meant for me. And those drops of rain are meant for me to experience renewal. That's why the Torah specifically tells us to call the Torah portion of disease, to call it birth. Torah wants us to define our challenges and realize that they're all about birth and renewal. The Torah specifically chooses this particular punishment, this particular disease, to highlight this, because it is only in this particular punishment that we see openly that it's meant for our good. Because, as I mentioned before about Maimonides, That there was a gradual thing. God was sending one step after another. It worked. I'm not sure if Geppetto and Pinocchio emerged from the story in the Torah or not, but it worked in a similar way to Pinocchio. He spoke, and directly his nose got bigger. So lahavdil, in a similar way, a person spoke what he shouldn't speak, and directly there was an immediate impact in his life in this world as a result of him speaking negatively. So the Torah calls the Torah portion about disease with the name renewal, because disease is about renewal. The disease actually cures him from his spiritual malady. And that's also why there is a halachic ramification to this idea. Let's say this guy who has this disease is going outside the Jewish camp, and he finds and discovers many other people with the same disease as him. The Torah says he's not supposed to contaminate the camp. He has to be in quarantine. But let's say he goes and he's in quarantine. He's not going to contaminate anybody else. He's outside the camp, but he's now with a bunch of other people who have the same disease. Can he go to one of those coronavirus hotels where everyone else has the disease already? Can he go to a Mitzoyer, Tzaras hotel with a bunch of other people with that disease? So the answer is no. Because since the whole purpose of the quarantine is only in order to rehabilitate him into society, that's the purpose of the disease, to help him learn a better way of talking, better way of looking at people. Therefore, he can't hang around people with the same disease who are the ones who are, you would first suspect that they would engage in talking the same kind of speech. So he has to stay away from those people too. It's part of his lesson that he, just like when you speak negatively about a husband to their wives, or you speak negatively to a wife, about a wife to a husband, what happens is you cause enmity between husbands and wives. If you speak negatively to Yankel about Shmerel, then Yankel doesn't want to hang around with Shmerel. So just like the Mitzera, this guy had caused separation between husbands and wives and friends, so too the Torah wants him to be in quarantine to learn a lesson. And therefore another interesting halachic ramification is, let's say there are no Jewish camps. Let's say he's in a place where the Torah says he has to be quarantined. There has to be a message here. He has to get something out of the experience. He has to be away from civilization, so he has to be outside a camp. If there are no camps, he cannot begin to get cured because there's no experience of quarantine. Quarantine is about going outside the camp, feeling that you're different and you're in confinement. If he doesn't have that experience, he cannot recuperate. And that's also why the second Torah portion this week, Mitzorah, is called the man with the disease, although it's not really about disease, it's about cure. It's again, the Torah is highlighting to us, when the guy's coming back home, don't think that's a new chapter. That is a continuation of the previous chapter. In fact, it's the same as the previous chapter. Just as the previous chapter was about renewal and recovery spiritually, the second chapter, where he physically gets better, is the same continuation of that exact point. He was better spiritually because he got the disease, and now, of course, he comes better physically as well. It's a continuation. What was healthy internally has now emerged to become something that's healthy externally. He got better spiritually, and now, of course, gets better physically. It's not something different than the disease. The disease is the cure, and the cure is the disease. It's the same thing. Now, this truth is something the Torah gives us to give us a lens for our challenges. But it's not only about challenges. It's about every single day of our lives, every single moment of our lives. The Jewish people are in exile. Rabbi Hillel Paritcher, famous legendary genius in Chassid, was once leading a Hasidic gathering in a basement. And hundreds of years ago, they're in the basement and the lights go out and someone comes to join the gathering. He walks into the basement and the guys, it's so dark in here, what are you doing here? And Rabbi Hillel says, and one of the guys says, you get used to it, sit down, you'll get used to it. Rabbi Hillel says, that's the problem. You get used to it. You don't realize You're in the darkness. That's really dark. When you don't even know you're experiencing darkness, that's really dark. Not realizing that the world's not the way it's supposed to be. Our real home is Jerusalem. Our real home is Mashiach. The reality is that God and Torah and mitzvot, that's the reality. And if us being encumbered with all of our petty concerns that we have day in, day out, isn't our true reality. It's not our home. It's not our true self. But our mitzvot that we do are called tazria. Although we may be experiencing a hardship of exile, the Torah says, I want the Torah portion of tazria, the first Torah portion, is the Torah portion about exile. And the Torah says, I want you to know in exile that there's a title. There's a title for exile. Many of you may not remember this, but in the 1980s, there was a commercial that Dunkin' Donuts did for their very fine donuts that I've never tasted, Baruch Hashem. And their advertisement begins with a man hearing the alarm clock go off in his room at some ungodly hour. And he hears the alarm clock and he says, time to make the donuts. And he gets up and he's walking in his house, time to make the donuts. And a couple hours later, people come to the store and he presents to them these fantastic donuts that he had made with such difficulty. So Torah titles, the first Torah portion this week, Tazria, to tell us, number one you have to know is you're making donuts. You're not just, it may be difficult, it may be hard, you have to do what God says, but not only do you have to do what God says, you have to be aware that what you're doing does something. Rabbi Khan, the Langazon, used to talk about in the lessons that I had from him. I was studying in 770 in the Rebbe's Yeshiva. He would talk about he's still teaching there, the Langazon, Hasidic Grand Master. Talk about the difference between a good soldier and a weak soldier. A weak soldier may know how to jump and hide and throw a grenade and roll and do all that kind of stuff, but he doesn't think he's going to win the war. A good soldier is someone who believes in his general. He knows he's going to win. So the first thing the Torah tells us is you may be in a state of disease spiritually. You're not in Jerusalem. Mashiach hasn't come. We have to know there are seeds being planted. That's number one. But that's not enough. The Torah tells us there's another Torah portion this week, and that's Metzorah. Metzorah is about the coming of Mashiach. Metzorah is about the guy coming back to the camp, which represents the Jewish people coming back home. During the exile, Jewish people are compared to a Metzorah, to someone who's quarantined and sent outside the camps. The second Torah portion this week is about the guy coming home, the renewal, the celebration. Baruch Hashem, we're back home. And the Torah says you should know the title of that Torah portion, Metzorah, the coming of Mashiach, is directly connected to the previous Torah portion. There are many people, wonderful people, that wake up in the morning and they ask themselves the question, what does God want me to do today? And it's a very noble question. They go to sleep at night and they think that I do what God wanted me to do today. And it's a very noble question. And it's a good question. There's a deeper question, a more meaningful question, more purposeful question that we need to ask ourselves. That's why the Torah puts these two Torah portions together. Most years, as this year, the two Torah portions are together because the Torah wants to tell us something. It's not enough to ask yourself, are you doing what God wants you to do? It's not enough just to put one foot in front of the other and get the job done. The Torah says it's not enough to know that you're planting seeds. You could be planting seeds, but thinking, time to make the donuts, and you're not really invigorated and vivified and inspired by your knowledge of the future. So the Torah says you got to know Tazria is connected to Metzorah. The seeds are connected to the redemption. You have to do the mitzvot, do the God's commandments with the knowledge and with the feeling that you make a difference. When you say a bracha, it does something. When you daven Shemona Esrei, it does something. When you're kind to someone, it changes the very fabric of the world and causes the coming of Mashiach. It makes a change. As Maimonides says, that every word, every thought, every action that we do, before we do it, before we think it, before we say it, we should look at the world on a scale, and that very next thought you have could tip the scale and actually bring Mashiach to the world. You have to feel that. You shouldn't just ask yourself, am I doing what God wants? You should ask something more. You should say, what can I do to make Mashiach come faster? How can I make this happen now? What can I do to make Mashiach come faster? When you wake up in the morning, you go to sleep at night, we should have that question to ourselves, what can we do? And we should feel, we do a mitzvah, it's not just planting the seed, but we should plant the seed with the apples in our hand. We should plant the seed seeing the fruits of victory of the coming of Mashiach, visualizing and feeling purpose in our mitzvahs, feeling purpose in our Torah study, realizing that it does something and it brings us to somewhere. Not just we got to get stuff done, but that we have to feel that our mitzvahs that we do are alive and they have magic and they have energy and there's godliness in them and they change the world. That's the idea of planting a seed. That it's not just you're planting a seed, but tazriya matzera, you feel that the seed you're planting is valuable right now. It does something right now. The Rebbe Rasha put it this way. He said, there's nothing higher than today. When Mashiach will come, we will see the truth of what is true today as well. But it's still, okay, so just recapping for a second. It's possible to do God's commandments, and it's possible to wake up in the morning and only ask yourself the question, am I doing what I'm supposed to do? And that question could be similar to the guy trying to make the donuts. Okay, maybe you have a little better, maybe you have reverence for God, you have love for God, you want to do what God wants, you have joy in doing God's will, but you don't feel there's any benefit in what you're doing. You're just doing something for God, because God happened to ask you something. Rabbi Herschel Lipsker, and Gesund, before his wedding, I think it was his in-laws, wanted him to move back to France. And the Rebbe told him that he didn't want to go to France. So his, hey Yehuda, long time no see. He told the Rebbe was speaking to his parents-in-law before the wedding, and they told the Rebbe that they really want their daughter and son-in-law to move to France. And the Rebbe said that your son-in-law doesn't want to go to France. So they responded to the Rebbe, if the Rebbe will tell him to go, he'll go. So the Rebbe responded, if I'll tell him to chop wood, he'll chop wood too. In other words, it's possible to do the right thing, but you feel you're chopping wood. It doesn't do anything. Imagine if the mitzvot that we do, the Rebbe shared the following parable to explain this at a farbrengen. Similar idea, this idea in another talk. Rebbe shared how a nobleman, Paritz, went into a field and he sees this man working on the farm, and he's holding this sickle and he's waving the sickle up, waving the sickle down, and the nobleman, Paritz, he's so impressed. He's so wow, this is great. Look at the guy, the way he moves. And he says, you know what, I have an idea for you. Instead of you working the field, I'll pay you twice as much. Work in my living room. I just want to see you do this. This is amazing. The way you move, the way you up and down and you turn, it's majestic. Fantastic. It's amazing. Come to my living room. So he comes to the living room and he waves a sickle up and waves a sickle down. And after 5 minutes, he says, I can't continue this. I'm too tired. Why are you too tired? It's air conditioned in here. It's paying you twice as much. You're outside for hours. So he responded in Russian, Raboton Yevjet. He said, the work isn't noticeable. I don't see what I'm doing. I don't see if I'm accomplishing anything. I feel what I'm doing doesn't do something. I don't feel any power in what I'm doing. I feel this is just a worthless activity. So in a similar way, it's not sufficient just to know that we're planting seeds for a futuristic goal of bringing Mashiach. The Torah tells us that there are 2 Torah portions this week, and they're connected. Because you have to feel when you do a mitzvah, it does something. And not just it does something, it's more than that. Mashiach really is a mitzvah. What do I mean by that? Think about it for a second. What are we missing? Why do we need Mashiach? There are 207 commandments that were missing during the exile. It says in the Talmud, we're missing the light of Mashiach. The word light is 207, is equal to 207 because the 207 commandments were missing in exile. So if you care about God, you care about God's commandments, then you care about doing mitzvot. So the number one thing that Mashiach will do, Maimonides says, this is the halachic definition. This is what Mashiach means. What Mashiach means is the return of all mitzvot. We'll get all the mitzvot. So there will be a perfection of all of God's commandments. We'll have all 613. And that's just like the mitzvah will be perfect. We'll be perfect. We'll be full of the knowledge of God. We'll be full. We'll be comfortable. We'll be able to focus and think about God's words and pray with concentration and feeling. Will be real. The mitzvah will be real, and it's going to be amazing. That's what Mashiach is about. So when you do a mitzvah, what you're really doing is you're tasting something of the future. You're causing something of the future. You are bringing the world to the future. It's not only that your mitzvah that you do will later bring Mashiach. It's not only that you have to feel that your mitzvah right now have that magical impact in the world and bring light to the world. You have to feel that the light of Mashiach is the same light of your Shabbos candles. The light of Mashiach is the same light of your Hanukkah candles. The light of Mashiach is the same light of the words of Torah you say when you walk in the street. The light of Mashiach is the same light as you put on film. That is the light of Mashiach. Schar mitzvah mitzvah. The Talmud says the reward for a mitzvah is the mitzvah itself. What does that mean? Mashiach will come. We'll see the reality of the mitzvah we do today. We'll see the revelation of what they are today. So that's the meaning of the Torah telling us these two Torah portions are connected. The Torah is telling us, bring Mashiach into your life. Realize when you daven to God, when you pray to God, you're tasting of the future era of Mashiach when you'll daven perfectly. And you're making that happen. Now, historically, this Torah portion wasn't always called Metzorah. Rashi or Hadyagoin had a different name for the second Torah portion this week. The second Torah portion this week used to be called So Shall Be. Zot tiyeh, so shall be. You know why? Because Mashiach wasn't that close. And at that time in history, it was sufficient for a person to be more conscious of asking the question, what does God want from me? As opposed to, how can I make Mashiach come right now? That wasn't the call of the hour. But now the call of the hour is, Hashem wants us to be Mashiach conscious, to think about it, to speak about it, to live with it, to feel it, to feel in our mitzvot, in our Torah, in our Shabbos. Shabbos, the taste of Mashiach. It's a taste only. It's not the full Mashiach. But you know Shabbos is something otherworldly. You know that. You've been there. You feel it. That's what every mitzvah is. That's the idea the Torah is telling us. Call the Parsha Metzorah. What's the idea of calling the Parsha Metzorah?
Can I say something?
In a minute. Somebody just to conclude. I'm almost done. The Gemara says that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi met Eliyahu Hanavi, and he asked Eliyahu Hanavi, when is Mashiach coming? Eliyahu Hanavi says, I'll tell you when he's coming. What I want you to do is go to the gates of Rome, and there you'll meet Mashiach, and there you'll ask him when he's coming. So he goes to the gates of Rome, and before going to the gates of Rome, he asked Eliyahu Hanavi, how will I know who Mashiach is? Eliyahu Hanavi says, Mashiach is the man with tzaras. He's the man with the disease. And Yeshua ben Levi goes there. He asks Mashiach when he's coming. Mashiach says he's coming today. And Eliyahu Hanavi, Yeshua ben Levi is very excited. He tells his friends, guys, get ready. Mashiach is coming today. And Mashiach does not come today, as we know. And he asked Yeshua ben Levi, Mashiach is not a man of truth. He said he's coming, he's not coming. So Eliyahu Hanavi answered, Mashiach meant the verse, today, if you will hearken unto his voice. It's a verse. Today, if you'll hearken unto his voice. So the obvious question is, the simple meaning of the story is, he asked him when he's coming. Why did Mashiach tell him riddles? Why did Mashiach call the guy with a disease anyways? The answer is, very in short, The reason why Mashiach is called the man with the disease is because the guy, the Alter Rebbe says that we don't get this disease nowadays. This disease doesn't happen to people nowadays. It only happened in the time of the temple, time of Moses, because this disease was something which was very external. It's only something that touched your house, touched your clothing, and touched your skin. It exemplified how a person's, whatever negativity there was, is only external. So the idea of Mashiach being the one with a disease is not only because Mashiach is someone who suffers for the Jewish people. The idea of Mashiach being the one with a disease of tzara specifically means there's something still negative there. The world is ready for something big to happen, but it hasn't happened yet. So Mashiach says, we're hayom, it's ready to happen. Mashiach is in a state of tzara'as, meaning he's there by the threshold of redemption and it's ready to happen. And therefore, Torah tells us, at this stage of history, we have to call the Parsha Metzora, we have to realize that the wall of exile is already down, and Mashiach looks through the cracks in the wall, and he's asking each of us to do something, to make it happen, and to feel in the mitzvot that we do, in the Torah that we learn, that we're making that change, that something is happening now. Even before Mashiach comes, to the mitzvah that you do and the Torah that you learn, that it's something that's palpable and tangible and real, that we could feel already today. Rabbi Yehuda, you wanted to share something, please share with us. Any other questions, comments, criticism, tomatoes, cucumbers?
Okay, what I want to say, just I didn't hear everything what you said from the beginning, but there is a sikha of the Rebbe that is talking about the Mashiach and Beit HaMikdash, and he called it, this parasha, he called it B'Shem Tzarua. And Tzarua, this is the title of Inyanim of the Mashiach and Beit HaMikdash. And the Gemara, as you said before, it's also, they called it Chivra, which is Metzora. Yeah. Okay, I stop here, but I just want to add for what you said.
Shkoyach Yehuda, thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining. Any questions, comments, criticism, tomatoes or cucumbers?
I'm studying every night. I just came from now with Rabbi Wilhelm, studying with him.
So,
thank you very much. Have a good Shabbos.
A good Shabbos. All the best. Kol Tov.
L'chaim.